It was pretty disappointing when the news of Liverpool Studios closing down, because that basically meant that the Wipeout series was coming to a close. So, what do gamers have at their disposal? Well, with the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation TV, you actually have a few games. The PlayStation Vita Wipeout game, Wipeout 2048, unfortunately isn't compatible with the PlayStation TV. But if you got the micro console or the Vita, you can also play the PSP Wipeout games, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here is my retro review of the PSP game Wipeout Pulse. Wipeout Pulse is a 3D racing game with combat and RPG elements thrown into the mix. When you're playing through the game, there were 4 main game modes there was Racing Campaign, where the main campaign is stored. There's Race Box, where you can customize your own set of races. And there were the DLC and multiplayer options. Unfortunately, the online multiplayer servers have been taken down, and because the web browser for the PSP is no longer supported, you can no longer get on the website to get the DLC. When you're going through Racing Campaign, everything is set up in grids. Every grid you go into, which is essentially a chapter in the game, has various races in it that you have to complete to unlock the next grid. Races can vary, and there are 4 main types of races you can go through. There are single races and tournaments, where you're basically just going through the default race of racing against 7 others and speeding past them and fighting them with weapons to try to be the first one across the finish line. There are time trials, where you're basically racing against the clock to get a good high score for an overall time or an average lap time. There is the zone race, where you have a vehicle that is constantly increasing speed and you have to try to last as long as you can. And there's also the elimination races, which are definitely one of my favorites. In elimination, you're infinitely going around the racetrack until someone gets so many kills. This is actually more focused on the combat, and that's one reason why I really like it. When you're actually going through a race, you will be going through various tracks with a lot of twists and turns, but there are a few more elements in the game. Since this is a combat racer, it's similar to games like Mario Kart. There are 2 basic item platforms littered around the raceway. There are boosts, which give you a temporary boost in speed, and there are weapon and item generators. When you go over a weapon and item generator, you get an offensive or defensive weapon to use. Offensive weapons could vary from missiles, plasma charges, bombs, mines, and others. And the support items are fewer in number, but they can range from boosts to give you a huge speed boost for a minute, autopilot to let the game help you get around tricky corners, or a shield to shield you from an incoming attack. With the combat in mind and with the pacing, it is no question that this is a very intense racer. But as far as difficulty is concerned, it's not an extremely hard game to beat. You can toggle the difficulty as you go through the race campaign. There is easy, medium, and hard. If you go on easy, it's nice and casual, but even on medium and hard, the most extreme racing fanatics aren't going to be challenged all that much. There is a good challenge for those of us who aren't used to constantly playing racing games, but it's definitely not the hardest racer out there. The only negative thing I'll say about the actual gameplay is that it can feel a little repetitive. Unlike Wipeout 2048 and its DLC expansions, there isn't a huge variety of different tracks you can go on. A lot of the game's races take place on the same tracks, so when you're going through the first, say, 4 grids, you're going to see a lot of the same tracks over and over and over and over again. While each of the races are very different and unique, it's going to feel repetitive because you're seeing the same tracks over and over again. As far as length is concerned, there are 16 grids, and each with more races than the previous grids. The first grid has 8 races, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of what to go on. Unfortunately, the lack of multiplayer and DLC does limit your options and make this a single player experience, unless of course you want to use ad hoc mode. You can use ad hoc with anyone in the room with a PS TV, PS Vita, or PSP, but you can't go online for multiplayer anymore. Controls I normally don't mention, and you know that controls means something good or something bad. In this case, it's something bad. The PSP didn't have a whole lot of buttons at its disposal, and some of the controls are a little bit awkward. Specifically, the default control option for looking behind you is done with the triangle button. So when you're holding down this X button to keep accelerating, you have to kind of creep your middle or last fingers up across the PSP while you're going through this intense race to hit that, and it really is a hindrance. You can redirect this to one of the touch screens, but on the PlayStation TV, you don't have a whole lot of options. The control scheme is customizable, but it's still a little bit awkward no matter how you set it up. As far as presentation is concerned, everything looks good. The visuals don't look like the best PSP game out there, but they definitely look nice. I've seen some Vita games that don't look as good. There are a few jagged edges if you really want to look for them, but honestly, it looks pretty good. Everything else with performance is good. Load times never really exceeded 3 seconds for me, give or take, and the frame rate always stayed steady. Wipeout Pulse is a fast-paced combat racer that was very highly praised on the PSP. It does feel a little repetitive, it doesn't have multiplayer anymore, and it has some pretty awkward camera controls. But if you can look past this is still a fun and intense racer. Reviews to Go rates Wipeout Pulse a 7 out of 10. If you'd like to comment on this further or on anything that I haven't mentioned, feel free to below or head to my site.